Hi everyone, welcome to Infinite Women. I'm your host, Allison Tyra, and today I wanted to bring you a story from my home state of Indiana, where suffragist Stella Stimson helped lay the legal groundwork for election integrity in the U.S. years before women in Indiana could even vote. Described by Smithsonian magazine as a 50-year-old church-going mother of four with an oval face, high cheekbones, a strong brow, and graying black hair, Stimson was a clubwoman, one of countless women who banded together to work for the improvement of their communities. Seeing the corruption of Terre Haute mayoral candidate Don Roberts and his permissive attitude toward the city's red light district and the illegal activities that thrived there, she was reputedly moved to put an end to his reign when he approached her to try to gain her support and her influence with the women of Terre Haute. When she rebuffed him, he reportedly told her, "I'm going to be mayor of Terre Haute, and you women might as well support me." They did not. As the Smithsonian magazine puts it, what she did next would launch the most comprehensive takedown of a plot to subvert the vote in the nation's history, setting a precedent for clean elections that still prevails today. 1913 was not the first election that Roberts had rigged. In 1909, he'd brought in hundreds of men from out of town to overwhelm polling places and stuff ballot boxes. When one man asked police to do something, he was beaten by a mob of around 150 men. But the laws were not designed to stop men like Roberts. Only a registered voter, meaning no women, could hold any role as an election official. So when Stimson used her connections, she was able to recruit around 60 women to observe polling places during the Democratic primaries in March 1913. And the women, many described as quiet church women by Stimson, were sometimes shocked by blatant talk of bribery. Roberts won more votes than all four of his opponents combined. But the women couldn't really do much about it. That October, only weeks before the general election, the city released updated electoral rolls with 16,000 new voters, more than 3/4 of the entire eligible voting population in the entire city. Stimson and her volunteers spent a week manually copying down the names and addresses, then going to check them out in person, and they were able to prove that more than 2,700 were clearly fraudulent, with addresses at vacant lots, businesses, and even the registration clerk's own home. But only a registered voter could challenge voters' eligibility. On Election Day, Stimson and her volunteers were out in force, this time with more than 450 women, armed with pencils, notebooks, and even cameras, this was still the early days of cameras. But they were there to catch men in the act of fraudulent voting, and they did. After Roberts won, Stimson contacted the governor of Indiana, who responded that she would have to take it up with the local sheriff, who was, of course, in Roberts's pocket. In fact, it was two police officers, men, of course, who soon filed a legal complaint because Roberts had ordered them fired without cause. The judge would later dismiss the grand jury after Roberts arranged for the state's Democratic Party boss to promote the judge to state probate commissioner. But the special prosecutor who had been appointed was not so easily dissuaded, particularly once he'd seen all the evidence from Stimson and her volunteers, in addition to the results of his own summonses and subpoenas. Joseph Roach Jr. found that some precincts had ballot boxes pre-stuffed, and around 35,000 sample ballots, with the top saying sample ballot just torn off, had been submitted by either repeaters who returned to the same polling place multiple times under different names, and floaters who submitted votes across multiple precincts. Giving up on state officials after what had happened with the first judge and the governor and various other officials, Roach had his law partner search for a federal statute, and they found an untested law against election conspiracy. He got a U.S. district attorney and a federal judge on board, but the statute couldn't be applied to a local election. They had to wait for the 1914 election, which would include a race for the U.S. House of Representatives. Meanwhile, Stella Stimson was already planning for Election Day, this time with Roach's help. Whereas before the women had hoped to shame the men with their presence and documentation, hoping to deter the election fraud from happening in the first place. But now they were focused on collecting evidence that would stand up in court. Ahead of the big day, the women kept track of new names in the electoral rolls and created poll books for each precinct, noting questionable registrations, like the 60 new voters supposedly all living at the address of a one-room saloon, or the 100 listed at another saloon. Election day came, and Stimson was at her polling place from 5:30 a.m. onward. Her log for the day included floaters who couldn't remember the fake names they were registered under, and repeaters who returned in different outfits. Only 18 African American men were registered to vote, and yet 300 showed up at the polls. Republican and progressive officials were assaulted and barricaded from the polling places so that they couldn't observe the goings-on. There was even a shootout between two election board members. Because almost every city and county official was in the conspiracy, nothing could be done but get the evidence, Stimson later said. It was for this the women stayed. Within days, the U.S. attorney brought the women's case to a grand jury. That Christmas Eve, U.S. Marshals played Santa with arrest warrants instead of presents. So many conspirators were arrested that they had to convert a hotel into a jail. The court case was called United States v. Axel, named for the conspirator with the first name alphabetically. By the time the trial started in March of 1915, 88 men had pled guilty, leaving 28 defendants. Ironically, many of Terre Haute's leading club women were in Indianapolis at the time. It's the state capital, and so that's where the trial was being held. But they were there for a suffragist convention at the same time, and they skipped their own event that day to attend the trial instead. Stimson was the prosecution's first female witness the following week. The jury found every defendant guilty on every count, and Roberts himself was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison and a $2,000 fine. But more importantly, in the broader sense, the civil court later cited U.S. v. Axel in another case, affirming that Congress could act to protect voting rights, which laid the foundation for the Voting Rights Act and for prosecuting election crime. Join us next time on Infinite Women, and remember, well-behaved women rarely make history.